Yeah, you have started and it is live now.
Give me a second.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Now I have activated the live button also, so you can start with the webinar.
Okay. Okay. Thanks. Thanks. So we are seeing everyone joining, and now I'm going to start this webinar. So before we get started, just have a little request. You may please switch off your video and put your mic on mute mode. Also, I request not to flood the chat box with good afternoon, hello, and introduction messages, as many important information might be lost in between. Your active participation is important throughout the session. If you have any question or query related to the presentation of the speaker, you can put in chat box or you may unmute once the presentation is finished and you can ask the question. Once again, we'd like to remind you that this session is being recorded and we are live on YouTube, right? So good afternoon, everyone. I am Dr. Vimal Chandra Verma, Assistant Professor, School of Management, BBD University, Lucknow. I welcome you all to this international webinar on research in academia, 3 questions we need to answer, organized by SOM, BBD University, Lucknow. First of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to our Chief Patron, Mrs. Alka Das Gupta, Honorable Chairperson, BBD Group, Patron, Mr. Viraj Sagar Das, Honorable President, BBD Group, Ms. Sonakshi Das, Honorable Vice President, BBD University, Professor Dr. A.K. Mittal, Vice Chancellor, BBD University, Lucknow, for providing me an opportunity to organize this webinar. I am also thankful to Dr. Sushil Pandey, Dean School of Management, BBD University, to entrust responsibility and guidance to organize this webinar. On behalf of entire BBDU fraternity, I welcome you, everyone present in this session, and all those who are connected with us through YouTube Live. We feel privileged to welcome our international participants in today's webinar on research in academia, 3 questions we need to answer. Thank you for joining us. Today, we have with us Dr. Sara. Sara, we feel privileged to have you in this webinar as a guest speaker. Brief about Sara. Dr. Sara is affiliated at the University of Oxford and she recently joined the Office of National Statistics as a research analyst in the UK. Her most research project is the impact of different work-life course on women's well-being and quality of life in early retirement and welfare regimes, which helps shape this. She has been working on it with Professor Sarah Harper. She is the director at Institute of Aging, University of Oxford. Sarah's research interests extend to the areas of well-being, gender, inequality and longitudinal analysis and cover a range of topics such as health, work career, family forms and family formation. Dr. Sarah previously worked in Switzerland, the University of Lausanne and the Swiss Center for Expertise in Social Sciences, and Canada, University of Lethbridge, where she investigated the association between life events, health and well-being of adults with a life course perspective. Last but not least, she has published a lot of research papers in reputed journals like PACE and all. So that's all about Sarah. Sarah, now over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for this invitation. I'm delighted to be here today, even though virtual, and to talk with all of you and hopefully to exchange our ideas and also to have this discussion on what research is in academia. When everyone invites me, we thought that it could be a good opportunity to discuss together what is research in academia, and particularly what we have to focus on when we are doing research. And in some way, this presentation would like to be a journey inside the research. As Vimal mentioned, I'm currently work at the Office for National Statistics in the UK, and my previous experience was at the University of Oxford. So most of the presentation today, I would say all the presentation today is based on my previous experience. I will give you also, I will describe an example of my research that I did previously at the University of Oxford. The main aspect that I wanted to discuss with you today are, as I mentioned before, what research is, and then I will go directly to one of my projects, and I'm looking forward to your comments about it, and all the questions are very welcome. And in general, when we talk about research, I think we talk about a very fascinating topic, but often also pretty complicated. And once we approach research, I think the three main answers that we have to bear in mind are the ones that are displayed now on the slide, which are what, how, and why. And I think answering these questions is very important to proceed in an order way to do our research. What I mean with the what? When we think about what, we think firstly about objectives that we are going to analyze in our research. In other words, what is our main research question? And this is central and crucial for all our journey inside the project or inside the paper. There are different aspects about objectives that I think are very, very important. We bear in mind every time. Firstly, we have to be focused. And we have to be very clear which is our problem, which is our research question, which could be a single research question or also multiple research question. But whatever question we have, it should be explained very well. The second aspect is that it should be researchable. We have to be very clear what we want to analyze and if it's possible to answer our question with the tools, the skills, and the resources that we have. And very similar, it means that it should be also visible. We have to be specific on what we want to answer, and this should be enough to answer truly. Of course, our research question should be also very relevant to our field, and one of the aspects that is very, very important in academia, both for publication and when we apply for fundings, is that our research should be focused but should be also innovative. And the innovation is very important in general in research because it could open new discussion and also new views. The second aspect that I would mention is how. And when I think about how, it means how we are going to answer our research question. Therefore, thinking about how, thinks about methods. Social sciences, which is the field in which I'm working, when we think about methods broadly, we think about too many aspects. One is quantitative and the other is qualitative. I'm not going details about the differences between quantitative and qualitative, but I think it's very, very important to bear in mind which are the questions that we are able to answer with the quantitative research and qualitative research. In a broad way, and apologize me, I wouldn't specify too much, but just to have a clear in mind that when we approach a new research using quantitative methods, we will be able to represent a specific situation from the statistical point of view. When we approach a research from the qualitative point of view, we're able to understand much more in detail some aspect of our object, but we are not able in general to define it as a representative of the population. And the final main question that I would answer when I approach a new research or I'm writing a new project is why. And this question is becoming more and more crucial in academia, because why means the impact that our research, our study could have. And this is very, very important also when we are going to write fundings. Everybody will ask you why we want to do this research. There are different kind of impacts, of course, that we could think about. The two main impacts that we have to highlight when we give, we suggest a new project or new paper are the academic impact and the economic and social impact in the social sciences. And of course, when we talk about academic impact, it means that we want to give a contribution to academic advantages across also within disciplines, and together with academic impact, when we talk about economic and societal impact, we think a little more about the contribution to the society and the economy. After this introduction of what research is for me, and which is the approach that I take for it, I would go a little more in details on an example of research. And as I mentioned before, I will explain and describe what I did at the University of Oxford together with Professor Sarah Harper. However, before going into my project, I would like to describe a little bit my previous experience. I had my PhD in Italy. I'm originally from Italy. After my PhD, I moved to Canada and Switzerland before coming to England. I always work in academia. And these 4 experiences are all characterized by my main interest in health and well-being of people. And I always answer my research questions in the 4 different countries in which I worked using a quantitative approach. In particular, my main interest is to look at the individuals over life course and understand how much the previous life events could have an impact on health and well-being over life or also at the end of their life. And in general, I used, as I mentioned, longitudinal of big data set. In Italy, I was focusing on an Italian longitudinal data set. In Canada, I used the longitudinal Canadian data set, which was focused on health. And in Switzerland, I used the national longitudinal data set as well. My research at the University of Oxford, as Vima mentioned, has focused on the impact of life course, in particular employment life course, and domestic duty on the health of women. We took into consideration, in particular, women for some reason that I will give you a little later. And one of the main aspects of this research is that we look in different European countries to understand similarities and differences. In general, for this project, we took in consideration 3 main aspects. As you can see from this slide, the first one is a life course perspective. We use as well a comparative approach and a gender approach. When we talk about a life course perspective, we talk about a dynamic study. Indeed, with the life course perspective, we look at the entire life of individuals, and we study it dynamically. In this way, we are able to take in consideration changes, evolution, as well as the interaction between different life spheres. We know from previous research that life and previous events that have happened in our life have a strong impact on later life outcomes. In general, positive events in our life have advantages on our health and well-being in later life, and disadvantages, of course, they have a negative impact on our later life. But something that we think is very important to understand more and more is how the different life events and their combination could have an impact during our life. The second aspect that I mentioned is the comparative approach. In particular, for this project, we took in consideration 12 countries in Europe. And for these 12 countries, we looked inside their welfare states to understand better similarities and differences. And this is very important to analyze the labor market structures, as well as to understand better the policies of different countries, and potentially also to focus on what would be important to improve about policies in different countries to increase the health and well-being of the population. The third aspect that we took in consideration is the gender perspective. As I mentioned before, in our project we focus on women, and the reason why we choose only women is because the life of women is often more complicated in terms of studying the life of women. Indeed, despite there have been quite important social changes in the society in the last decades, we know that women have still the major role in the household. Women are the one who take care of family members, and often they have to combine economic employment with domestic duties. And the combination of this aspect could have an important impact on the well-being during their entire life, but also in later life. Instead, if we look at the life of men, which of course is very interesting as well, but we could see that their trajectories, their work trajectories are much more stable, and they are also focused, or mostly focused on full-time employment. And this makes the working life of women comparing with the life of work of men very, very different. One of the main aspects that we took into consideration in our research is work. And the reason why we focus on work is because work is recognized from several research that is one of the major determinant of health and well-being even in later life. Indeed, the work brings a sense of belonging to a social network, but also a sense of control and autonomy, as well as a sense of reward. And we have to also consider that it's a main determinant of financial circumstances, not only during the life, but also during our retirement, as well as it could influence the access to good standard of medical care during retirement. The first step of our research, as always, was to look at the previous studies on this topic. In this slide, you can see just some of a selected studies that they really focus on health and well-being of women. Many of them focus on Europe, some of them only in one country, and only few of them they approach this topic using a comparative aspect. In addition to that, we have always also to mention that when we talk about health and well-being, we could take in consideration different measures and different variables. And in these studies, we could say that there is a mix of health and well-being indicators. Of course, each of these studies has specific characteristics, but if we want to summarize in some way the main results of the study, we could say that in general, women who spend the entire life in informal care and they invest the entire life only in domestic work, so basically they never had experience in the labor market, they tend to have worse health in later life. Instead, women who take a shorter career break for family care, or they move from a family care break to paid work, they tend to have the most favorable late life health outcomes. So potentially what we get from these studies is that working, even though with a break during our working life, seems to help women to have a better health in later life. These previous studies lead us to our first research question, which is formulated in the way that you can see in this slide. So what we are going to analyze in details is if are the work trajectories associated with health in later life. And as I mentioned before, one of the aspects that we definitely take in consideration in our studies is the comparative approach. Therefore, we consider different countries, in particular 12 countries in Europe, and we think that this is an aspect that research didn't take too much in consideration, even though is a crucial, because inside this aspect we can consider, for example, labor market intervention and family-friendly policies that they can definitely have an impact on health and well-being in later life. Therefore, our second research question is formulated in this way. So, which is the role of welfare state in shaping the relationship between the occupational trajectories and women's health? As I mentioned already before, we took in consideration 12 countries in Europe. You can see from this map that we consider some countries in the northern part of Europe, like Denmark and Sweden. We consider Ireland as well. We consider Central Europe, the green part of this map. Of course, Switzerland, and as well the countries in the south of Europe, in particular Spain, Italy, and Greece. And we acknowledge that making a macro group of these countries could bring a big summary of what they are. However, we needed to do it from a research point of view. So we organized this country using previous literature on in 4 main groups. The first one is considered liberal or market-oriented countries, and in this group, Ireland and Switzerland are included. In general, in this country, there is a limited state support to family. The second group includes Denmark and Sweden, in which there are extensive policy provisions that facilitate work balance. The third group includes most of the countries in the center of Europe, in particular Austria, Belgium, France, Germany, and Netherlands. And in this country, we still see that men as the main role in the labor market. But the states support families, in particular women, at a different level for their combination between paid work and family responsibilities. Countries in the south, which includes the welfares in the south of Europe, which includes Greece, Italy, and Spain, is called familialistic countries. And in these areas of Europe, the policies, the provision to families are very limited, and there is still a very strong gender role differentiation. To answer our research question, we use the Survey of Health, Aging and Retirement in Europe, which is more famous and more known as a SHARE survey. SHARE survey is a cross-national panel database, and it includes individuals age 50 and older. The positive aspect and the very interesting aspect for these surveys for us is that it has a longitudinal aspect, because the same individuals are interviewed over time. In addition to that, it has also a retrospective information, which means that the same individuals were asked information regarding their previous life from work point of view, health point of view, and also family events that happened before during their life. And in this case, we were really able to collect information regarding changes over time for each individual in our sample. To give you an example of our data set, if you look at the column on the left, you see that the same person has been interviewed for several times. For example, they started to interview this person at the age 55 until 62. I should here specify that, sorry, it's not necessarily that they were interviewed at this age. They might be also that these are retrospective information are included here. And for each year of this individual, we have exact information of the work episode. For example, person 1 in the first episode, she was unemployed, and at a certain point in episode 4, she started to work full time until the episode 8, when she was 62 years old and she retired. And our methodological approach followed exactly this schema, that at the moment in which the woman was retired, we picked the health and well-being. In this case, for person 1, we realized that this woman answered that and her health was could be defined as good, compared, for example, with the person number 2, in which at the time in which she retired, her health was very good. Instead, the last person in this slide, she declared that her health was bad at the age of retirement. The next slide include the sample selection. It's very important to specify which are the women who we were able to include in our sample. We of course had to work on the sample and excluding people who, for example, had difficulties in responding to retrospective questionnaire, as well as those who reported retired before age 45, unless their retirement at this age was a consequence of care task. And the main reason we decided to exclude these women is because potentially we don't know the reason behind their retirement so early. And finally, we exclude women who reported poor health over life with a very important problem, because we know that important problem during life have a strong impact also in later life. After this selection, our sample includes 5,088 women. Regarding our health indicators, we took into consideration 2 main variables. As you can see here, the first one is self-reported health, and this is, as the question mentioned, the self-reported information. There are 5 answers between excellent and very bad. For methodological reason, we had to record this answer in 3 categories. The first one was excellent and very good, the second was good, and the last one was bad and very bad. In addition to this, we wanted to analyze also the mental issues of women, in particular looking at their level of depression. And for this reason, we use what is called EuroD. EuroD is a standardized measure that is designed for international comparison for the level of depression, and it ranges between 0 and 12, where higher value means higher level of depression. Regarding our independent variable, which is the employment trajectory, we apply a sequence analysis to categorize our trajectories, and this sequence analysis allowed us to create, to start from 6 main categories of employment. As you can see here, there are full-time, part-time, unemployed, domestic worker in education, on the retired, and these are the main questions that the individuals could give at the time of the interviews. And after applying the sequence analysis, we obtain the entire trajectories, which all these trajectories started 30 years before the time of retirement for each individuals. And the first trajectories that we obtain is full-time employment. Here are included all the women who were employed full-time through their working life. The second one is domestic duties, which means that here there are women who never had experience in the labor market and they work at home through their entire working life. We have then other 2 categories, and in these categories we have included women who combine domestic duty and full-time employment during their life in the first categories, and the second categories they combine domestic duties and part-time employment during their entire life. And finally, we have categories in which we have included all the other combinations that, of course, are excluded in previous categories. And here there are, in particular, women who had really mixed trajectories. If we look at our sample, we could notice already quite a few differences between welfare states. In particular, from this graph, we can notice that in the familistic welfare states, which is the south welfare states in Europe, most of the women they spend the entire life in domestic work. And this is a clear difference compared with, for example, the dual earner welfare states, in which we see that almost 25 women they work full-time for their entire life. But even more interesting is that even women who didn't work full-time for their entire life, at least they combine paid work and unpaid work. And regarding the other 2 categories, which are, the other 2 welfare, which are the liberal and general family welfares, we can notice that there is a proportion of women who stay at home for their entire life, but there is also an interesting percentage of them who combine work, paid work and unpaid work. These graphs gives the first results, which are still considered descriptive results because they are not controlled for anything else regarding our research question. So they express the relationship between employment and domestic trajectories and EuroD, which was our variables that capture depressive symptoms. And as we can see from this slide, women who tend to work, to stay at home for their entire life, they have a slightly higher proportion of depression during later life. So if we see in the second categories, in which we include only women who stay at home for their entire life, we saw that a slight higher percentage of them, they have depressive symptoms compared with all the other categories. And on the opposite, women who combine domestic work and part-time employment, they seem to have little the disproportion of women who declare having depressive symptoms is slightly lower. This one, this graph reported the same information, but in this case we consider self-reported health. And again, if we look at the categories of domestic work, the proportion of women who reported having bad or very bad health is slightly higher compared with all the others. And for the following categories, which are women who combine domestic work and full-time employment, they seem to have a disproportion of women who declare to have a bad or very bad health is slightly lower than all the other categories. In this following graph, we looked at the relationship between the welfare state and the health outcomes. And in this case, we could notice that in the liberal welfare states, the proportion of women who declare having depressive symptoms is lower compared with all the other welfare states. And on the opposite, sorry, not on the opposite. At the same time, we notice the slightly lower percentage as well as in dual earner. Instead of in familistic and general families, we notice that the proportion of women who declare having depressive symptoms is slightly higher compared to the other two that I mentioned before. And finally, if we look at the relationship between welfare and self-reported health, we can notice again that in dual earner welfare, the proportion of women who declare having bad or very bad health is lower than all the other welfare regimes. To summarize these results, that there are, as I mentioned before, only descriptive results, and they don't take into consideration any other characteristic of women, we could say that women who are in the familistic and general families and women who had spent their entire life on the domestic duties, they have a higher probability of both poor health and depressive symptoms. We, as a second step of in our project, we employed multivariate analysis. In particular, we use regression models and predictive probabilities, and these models allow us to look a little more in details our research question, and of course control also for other personal characteristics of women. In particular, we took in consideration the family composition of each woman, looking at the number of children and grandchildren that women have at the time of retirement, as well as the presence of the partner during the working life. We took in consideration some economic characteristic, for example, income, of course, education, because we know that education has a clear impact on health and well-being. We also try to understand if they had an issue of poor health during their childhood, and as well as the year in which the women were born. And finally, we took in consideration the indicator of number the year after retirement, in which the dependent variables have been measured. From this graph, we could say that we look and we apply a regression model to understand the probability of depression symptoms by job trajectory in the 4 welfare regimes. And as we can notice, in all welfare regimes, the probability of depression symptoms is higher for women who stay at home for the entire life. And just to remind that a higher value means that the risk of depression symptoms is higher in this case. Next slide. Sorry. Looking a little more in details at this slide, we could see that in particular this risk is higher for women who live in general family and familistic regimes. So basically, from this first analysis, multivariate analysis, we have the confirmation of what we saw in the descriptive analysis, which means that working full times tend to reduce the risk of depressive symptoms. Instead, stay at home for entire life tended to increase this risk. And this happens even more in the general family and familistic regimes. We, of course, apply the same methods to understand better the self-reported health, taking into consideration job trajectories, again, in the 4 welfare regimes. And even here, the higher values indicate that there is a higher risk of a poor self-reported health in later life. And what these graphs shows is that women who worked for the entire life, they have a lower risk of poor self-reported health, in particular compared with women who stay at home for the entire life. And again, so this happens in all the welfare regimes, even though also for self-reported health, women who stay at home, women who are in the general family and familistic welfare state, they tend to have even worse poor self-reported health than all the women in the other 2 welfare regimes that we consider. And I want to clarify, because I wasn't able to include them in this graph, but all these values are statistically significant at 95%. If we could summarize our main results, saying that women in all the countries who stay at home to their entire life for domestic duties, they reported worse physical and mental health in later life. Instead of women who work full-time or also combine part-time and part-time work and domestic duties, worker activities in all welfare regimes, have the better physical and mental health in their life. And again, this happens in all the countries that we consider. So our conclusion is that yes, we could say a big yes to our second research question, that the welfare regime plays a crucial role in shaping the relationship between health and work trajectories. And this happens for different reasons, because different welfare states includes a different labor market intervention and also different family-friendly policies. And what we saw, as I mentioned before, is that familistic and general family countries, women are not only at a higher risk of poor health and depressive symptoms, but this is also stronger for women who spend the entire working life in the domestic work. And I would just to remind that these 2 welfare states, the familistic and general family, the welfare states in Europe where there are lower support to women who combine paid and unpaid work. We could then say that being active in the labor market increases the chance of better well-being in later life, and this happens everywhere in Europe, regardless of the welfare state. This, I think, should bring us to a specific thoughts about policies and thinking how much policies are important, and we have to think more and more of them, because there are policies that allow women, if they wish, to combine successfully paid employment with the family life. And this is could have a really positive impact on their health and well-being in the later life. And some of the policies that we could think about, of course, there are not only this one, there are many others, but too many policies that should come to our mind is the increase the provision of affordable childcare and the providing flexible working options. Thank you. This is the end of my presentation.
Now, if anyone has question, maybe related to research, how to publish, they can ask. I request all the participants, now they can unmute themselves and they can ask the question. Hello Ritu, can you see some question in chat box?
Yes, sir, I can see a question here.
Yeah, so you can take up the question and so that Dr. Sarah can explain about it.
There is one question by Miss Alia Mirza. She asked, if she wants to study the past paradigms of society like India, then what are the parameters that she should look for, and if you suggest book that talks about such parameters? This is a question. Am I audible, Sarah ma'am?
Yeah, thank you for this question. I should admit that I didn't focus exactly on the India society, which is a part of the project that Sarah Harper wants to pursue, and she will probably work on it on the next month. So I'm not really confident in answering this answer straight away. But something that I could definitely say is that in the literature there is more and more interest on this topic and on these questions. And this is not only European literature, but it is extremely interested in other societies like India, China, Japan. And this is for one of the main reasons that the society is getting older and older, and we really know that to make our society better for the future, and particularly to protect all the people from bad health in later life, we really need to think now about our life and their life. So I think that the general parameters that we need to consider when we study this topic is to adopt what is called life course perspective, which means looking at individuals of their entire life, following them, understanding exactly which are the factors that could improve their health and well-being later in their life.
Next question.
The next question is from Dr. M.N. Kathivaran. He has asked, what is the minimum size of questionnaire in a market-based research?
Sorry, I didn't, the audio was fantastic. Could you repeat the question, please?
The question is, what is the minimum size of questionnaire or the minimum number of questions should be included in the questionnaire for a market-based research?
Depends. I think giving a straight answer to this question is a little complicated because I think before answering this question, we have really to bear in mind which is the objective that we want to study, and of course the number, the set of question which I think is meant the number of questions that are included here really depends on the objective that we have. Of course, if we want to organize our research question based on a scale, then we need to have a consistent number of questions to include there, and then to apply the most appropriate statistical analysis to formulate and to create the best scales. But this is really depends on the research question that we have as a base.
Any other question?
Next question is by Ms. Shazia Parveen. She has asked, which scale should be most appropriate to interpret and analyze the quantitative data on a scale of 0 to 10?
In this case, I applied the scale that I used in my project is the one that is recognized at the international level, which is a yearly scale for depressive symptoms, and this case ranges between 0 and 12. And something that is possible to do once you use a space is to, of course, run regression models. But as a first step, something that I would definitely do is to do descriptive analysis on them, starting from the most simple average of this case, and then to understand a little better what there are the question inside this case and how we can treat it.
Then next question is from Ms. Aparna Tiwari. She has asked how an effective topic can be selected for research. Should it come from our interest area or should it focus on the prevailing issues of the society?
Yeah, this is also a very interesting question, and thank you for asking me this question. I strongly think that when we approach research, because the research is
Yes, sir?
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I think that this is a very interesting question because I really think that when we approach research, it's very important. Could you listen me? I think, yeah, probably I can keep going. So I think when we approach research, it's important that we consider both our interest and both what we can really do in terms of, for example, the data that we have, the resources that we have, and the best match is a combination of this aspect. So trying to understand what we are interested on and trying to understand what is the interest of the society, of, for example, from the policies point of view, which is the emerging topic that we could analyze at the present. And I think in social sciences there is quite a good number of aspects that nowadays are very important and that we can really take into consideration. The only aspect that I would really highlight, in particular if you want to start an academic career, is that it's really important that you work on something that you are interested in, because academia and research are often challenging areas to work in, and it's not, and they require sometimes to invest really a lot of times and quite a good number of hours. So if it's something that fascinates you, everything is much more attractive, and in some way it might be also slightly easier to work on it.
Next question, Ritu. Any other question?
This was the last question. Now, no more questions have been asked by any of the participants. So, I would like to request all the participants, if they have any question, then please ask, or we can wind up the session. Vimal sir? Hello, Vimal sir, am I audible?
Yeah, maybe it's mute, I'm not sure.
There might be some. Give me a few seconds, ma'am. I'll just call Vimal sir for the last note.
हाँ नहीं उधर से फोन आ गया था ना कुछ
हिमांशु सर को कॉल करिए हिमांशु सर को कॉल करिए आप Hello, Sarah ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am, there was a little network glitch with Vimal sir. He'll be back in a second, and he will be winding up the session. Please wait, and I request participants to please wait. The organizer, Vimal sir, will be coming back and winding up the session soon, within seconds.
आवाज नहीं आ रही Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Yeah, Ritu, any other question?
No, sir, there is no more questions, sir.
I'm very sorry, Sarah. Actually, my audio was creating problem. I was not able to listen to you.
Oh.
So I again request any of the participant, if you have any question, or we should move towards ending this international webinar. Any question? Sarah, one question may I ask on behalf of everyone, that lot of people, they have a problem how to move for a research project. That means how to decide what to you can say explore in research. So how you try to find out a topic, how you locate a topic which is you can say of high impact.
Yeah. I think when we approach research, we have to look at two main aspects. The first aspect is to understand what is relevant at the time in which we start research. And for doing that, I think it's very important to be a very good reader and to navigate in some way in the most international journals. To understand which are the topics that are most published and which are the topics that attracts the interest of the academia, of the funders, and of the public. And the other aspect that I think is really important to take in consideration is our interest. So the best match is combine our interest with what is relevant at the time in which we start to do research. And of course, another aspect that we have really to take into consideration is also the impact that potentially our research could have on the academic point of view and also on the society. Because this is really a question that we always need to answer. Both when we write a paper and when we propose a new project. Nowadays, the main call for projects and from papers, they really require a clarification of the impact of our research. And one of the other aspects that is becoming more and more important is the interdisciplinary perspective. So the opportunity to work with colleagues and researchers and professors, of course, who are from disciplines different than ours, that always bring more interest to the research. So this might be the main aspect that we have to think of.
One more thing, Sarah, that how to go for a, you can say, a good journal. While we are conducting research, how we can locate a good journal for our research study? What should be the strategy so that it is, you can say, published in very short period of time?
So one of the good strategies is firstly to become familiar with the journal in which our topics is usually published. For example, if we talk about aging, there are quite a few very good journals around the world. And something that I usually do in my experience is really to read through the journals, the different articles that they published, and also to look at the references of the publications. To understand well where all these main papers are I think doing like this could be a good way to select the journal that might be interested in publish our article. Of course, there is a high competition also in the publication nowadays. So we have also to be, let's say, strong and don't give up if we don't have a success right away. But another strategies that I would suggest to follow is also asking comments on the paper before we submit the papers to a journal, because having a different point of view, it's always very important to improve our work. There are also different websites and different tools that would help us to choose the best journal based on the titles that we have, or based on the keywords, as well as based on the abstract that we have. And there are quite different tools on the website. But the first aspect, even before choosing one of the tools, is to really be clear on what we want to publish, and very clear in our paper and in the structure of our paper. So following the international guidelines to structure it in a proper way where the research question is very clear, where the methods that we adopt is well described, and where also the impact that our project or our paper gives is crucial. I think you are mute. Sorry, I cannot listen.
Yeah. Sorry, I was mute. Thanks a lot for your beautiful insight towards, you can say, selecting a journal for publication. A lot of people also have, I can say, Sarah, they are, you can say, thinking that whether we should go for publishing, I can say, empirical studies or it may be qualitative studies. So, in case if they are planning for qualitative studies, what strategy they should follow?
Nowadays, it's well recognized that qualitative and quantitative studies are both really important to understand the society, and with them aim also to give some insights to the society. So there are also quite a good number of very good journals who publish qualitative studies. I always think that qualitative study is, as well as quantitative study, is a complex approach. And again, once we decided to go for a specific method, which could be maybe in this case a qualitative approach, we have to be also there very, very clear of what we are going to study. And in qualitative study, there is, I think, there is a also slightly higher risk of being misunderstood. So it happened when I was also reviewers for different journals that I received qualitative studies in which the objective was a description of a representative population. We have really bear in mind which are the differences between quantitative and qualitative studies, and very clarify very well when we are going to use one instead of the other and why. And this is, of course, depends on our research questions. If we want, as I mentioned before, looking into details of a specific phenomenon, then a qualitative study works very well, because through interviews, focus group, we can really see the details of a specific circumstances, phenomenon, or aspect of the society that we want to study. In other cases, if we want to take in consideration a broader pictures, then a qualitative study is a little more complicated to apply.
Okay, thank you. Thanks a lot for your answers. I hope so that all the participants will be benefited by your expert knowledge. So I thank you, Sora, for your expertise. I can say your good presentation to all of us, your study, your beautiful study which you shared, and through that we can, I can say, understand how to plan our research. So I again thank to all the participants for their active participation throughout the session. And if you have any other question, you can text us in your chat box. I'll be sending it to Sarah, and after that you'll be getting the reply. So thanks a lot, Sarah, for your precious time again. And in future as well, I'd like to invite you. Maybe if there is some events, then I will invite you for such wonderful discussions which you had a few minutes before. Thanks a lot, all the participants, technical coordinator, and now we shall end.
Thank you for the invitation and for all your questions and comments. Very interesting. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. So I shall end our meeting right now. Thanks a lot, sir. I'll be in touch with you later on. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Bye
Bye.
bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah ma'am. So, all the participants are requested to leave the meeting. The session is over now. The certificates and the feedback links will be provided within the 10 days of this seminar. So now all the participants can leave this seminar, this webinar. The meeting is over and the link, feedback link will be shared with you as soon as possible. Hopefully within 10 days. Thank you.